Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and this is going to be a little bit of a different episode because we're looking back at the whole deterioration, this whole long ongoing saga of the falling apart of the relationship between the religious leaders in the book of Matthew and Jesus of Nazareth. And we've seen it in chunks. Now we're about to go into chapter 23 of Matthew. And the relationship is going to go into complete free fall, and it's going to spiral all the way toward the religious leadership effectively getting Jesus executed. So before we get into this really ugly pivot, I thought it would be important to go back and remember how exactly it is that we got here. I don't know if you've ever had one of these conversations where you sit down with a friend at like Chili's or an Applebee's or something. You're like, look, I might have to change the names to protect the innocent, but I'm just coming off this whole relational saga. It was crazy. There's a billion little stories, and they said this and they said that, and then this happened. I seem to put the whole thing out in front of somebody, just spread it out on the table and just say it for my own good, just to make sense of the thing. And so here's the whole story. And you find a real good listener, and they nod and they listen and they sip their drink, and it's really kind of them to endure this whole brutal story. And then it kind of just feels good to get it out there. Well, I was fortunate enough to come into possession of a secret recording of a conversation between a Pharisee named Jeff and his buddy Mike, who's a really great listener. And apparently they went out to a tavern somewhere, and Jeff just poured out his heart and was like, here's the whole thing from my side as to what happened between us and Jesus. And I found this to be really compelling. I thought you would as well. I thought it'd be a good way for us to recap this relationship. And I think it'll set us up for understanding Matthew 23 really well. So I'm just going to play it for you. It's a little bit long. It'll probably take a couple of episodes to get through the whole recording, but I think it's time well spent. So let's give it a go. Mike, you know me. I'm not crazy. I'm not mad about everything. I'm not one of these guys who goes around and just wants to fight about every single little thing. But sometimes something is so screwed up, somebody is doing stuff that is so out of line and damaging to people that you have to step in. And that's what I think happened here. The only way for you to understand what happens for me is to go back to the very, very beginning. And the very beginning of the story is before anybody had ever even heard of Jesus of Nazareth, there was John the Baptist. Well, you know what happened with John the Baptist and Herod. I don't want to rant and rave. I don't want to do like the sour grapes thing. But honestly, the guy has like one sentence that he says, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And that works on people. And that's fine. If that's what people want, that's fine. But it's kind of a pain in my butt because then Carl tells me, oh, there's a thing happening out there and you have to go look at it. So we get a lousy per diem. We go on this multi-day trip away from the families, and we get there and it's exactly what you'd expect. A bunch of simpletons responding to a simpleton's message, and we didn't say anything. Nothing. All I did was walk up with the guys and just listen. Just be a presence. I mean, yeah, we were wearing like our dress blues and everything, so I'm sure it was a little intimidating for a guy who's basically naked, just wearing camel hair, and he's got his beard covered in honey. But it's not my fault that he dresses like a slob. And then he just starts yelling at us in front of everyone. And that, like, if you have a complaint with us as your religious leaders, like, you could probably bring that up in private. But when you just go nuclear in front of everybody like that, well, then we actually have a bit of an issue here, and understandably, me and the boys were a little bit put off. It was embarrassing. And then, fortunately, Jesus shows up, and there was a whole thing that happened, and I don't really care to speak to that, but I think people more focused on whatever happened there with him than they did with us. But that's really when things, I guess, started to go sideways. So I don't know, at that point, I guess things are reconcilable. I mean, I didn't like the way that felt or went down, but we still don't even know who we're dealing with. So John the Baptist, he goes and does his things. It feels like the focus now is on the guy who got baptized there, Jesus. We tagged along after him. It wasn't even like we got in his business. He was teaching people and talking with his friends and recruiting people, and we didn't stop him. We did not interfere. Like, we're just standing there. Like, admittedly, he could see us, but we were far enough away that we shouldn't have been bothering him at all. That people all the time were like, oh, it's weird that the Pharisees are over there. Well, like, I'm allowed to stand here. It's sort of a free country. And so we followed him up onto a mountain. He went up there to talk with some people, his by Capernaum, and we got close enough that we could listen. It just felt like the whole thing was super passive-aggressive, directed at us. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe our feelings were still hurt from the whole totally unprovoked attack in front of everybody that we got from John the Baptist. So, yes, maybe we were reading into it, but it felt like he was telling everybody not to listen to us. And we care about these people. This is our job. This is what we do. We're a part of a long trusted tradition. And so, yeah, admittedly, that rubbed me the wrong way too. And then in the middle of the speech, he's talking about how to pray and how not to pray. And he starts talking about how certain people pray. And he's like, certain people pray wrong. Don't pray like them. And he described exactly the way I pray. He knew exactly what he was talking about, and everybody there knew exactly what he was talking about, and it was embarrassing. So the speech gets over. I'm telling the guys, just be cool. But it's hard when all the members of your congregation are walking along talking about a guy they literally just met like an hour ago, and they're like, oh, like he says it so much better than the other guys say it. Like it's like he actually means it and actually has the authority to say these things, or however they said it. And I hated it, but we gained nothing from throwing a fit or picking a fight right there. We gain more from just hanging out, being around, reminding people of our presence. But it's really hard to keep your mouth shut when like 2 seconds after we get down off of the hill, a guy with leprosy, literally leprosy, like skin rotting off leprosy, I'm telling you, comes up to Jesus and is like, oh, help me. And Jesus, I hesitate to even say this because we're eating, touched him, like straight up, hand on him, touched him. And everybody's like, oh, that's so great, that's so brave. I'm like, that's not brave. That's disgusting, and it's dirty, and there's a reason we have rules about this. The rules are meant to protect you, people. Don't celebrate that. But, like, we didn't say that. We were just like that. And a bunch more things happen, and everybody's all excited. And mercifully, he just gets into a boat for no apparent reason with all his friends, and he just goes away. I'm like, well, good. Hopefully that's the end of that. And so we start packing up, and we're thinking we're going to get to go home, but he shows back up. And he gives another big talk in front of everybody. And everybody has to be there, and they're all excited. And then these people set an awful precedent by bringing a guy in, interrupt the whole talk, no decorum whatsoever. And the Galilean just stops what he's doing, goes over, and he's like, oh, well, yeah, your sins are forgiven. What? What kind of slipshod? God, you can't do that. Honestly, Mike, you know me. I want people's sins to be forgiven. I'm for that. That's great. But there's like a process, a protocol. And he just blew past all of that stuff. And I'm like, am I taking crazy pills here? And about the time I think that, he looks right at me. And he's like, why are you thinking that? And he's like, well, watch this. And I don't know if it was pre-planned or scripted or what, but he has a guy stand up and walk around. He's like, oh, I'm fine now. Believe in Jesus. Don't believe in the Pharisees. And understandably, that doesn't sit well with us. We're like, you're the one who is the problem, and we didn't say anything, and now you're trying to pin it on us in front of everybody. And from there, it just gets stupider. He shamelessly goes and recruits a bunch of rubes, a bunch of undesirables, like total low-hanging fruit types. And it's like, oh, we're having a movement here. Look at this. And then there's a big party. And all we did was quietly raise the objection that some degree of thoughtfulness about what message this sends to young people should be considered. And then he, again, scolds us in front of everyone. I'm not trying to make this into something it's not, but I'm telling you, if you were there, you would have felt it too. He was trying to drive a wedge between us and everybody else, and he knew exactly what he was doing. But then a little bit of time goes by, and he and his little crew that he's put together show back up. And it's like they want to see if they can provoke us into talking about things that we all agree are morally right and from God. And so they go around and they do stuff on the Sabbath that you're just not supposed to do. And maybe that stuff isn't the end of the world in small doses, but it's a death by inches kind of thing. I mean, if you violate the Sabbath in little ways and you do it in front of everybody, you say, oh, this is absolutely fine, God is completely cool with this, then people eventually are like, well, how do I do anything that God says to do? Who cares about anything, right? And so we're trying to do the world a favor and just push back on that terrible example. And again, we get this whole speech about how we don't understand how the things actually are. And here's how God actually is. Except now it's taken a whole new turn. And he's becoming like obsessed with himself and this imagined relationship he has with his father. I can only assume that means like straight up God. which is kind of blasphemy in and of itself, and it's kind of our job to tell people when blasphemy is happening. So I don't know why they're all crabby with us. It's what they told us to do. It's literally what they pay us to do. And this guy's talking about like one who's greater than the temple and using all of this grandiose but slightly veiled language, and these simple country folk can't hear it. They just don't get the implications of what he's saying. And so, look, we're not trying to be arrogant or proud, but if we don't say something, if we don't nip this in the bud, who's going to do it? It's for their own good. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm sorry. I'm getting all worked up. You did not do these things. I'm not angry at you. I just feel tremendous passion about all of this, and it feels really good to get this off my chest. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to get a refill on this thing. I'm going to count to 10. I'm going to calm down a little bit, and I'm going to come back over, and I want to tell you about the rest of this. Seriously, though, dude, you are a really good listener, and it feels amazing to just spill all of this out in order. This is a really complex saga, and I guess it just takes a while to recount the story. So next time around, we're just going to pick up eavesdropping on the conversation between Jeff the Pharisee and his buddy Mike. I mean, I don't know about you. I can only speak for myself, but I think eavesdropping on this conversation has been really helpful for me in remembering exactly how this relationship between the Pharisees and Jesus deteriorated over the first 22 chapters of the book of Matthew. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.